In a quiet park, a black man enjoys his afternoon, minding his own business. But to one police officer, his presence alone raises suspicion. Acting on nothing but his assumptions, the officer arrests him. What happens next? A startling revelation. The man in cuffs is an FBI agent. How far can prejudice blind someone to the truth? Let's find out. Willow Creek Park on a quiet afternoon was Aaron Carter's favorite retreat. As the sun filtered through the trees, he sat on a weathered bench, engrossed in a historical novel. For Aaron, an FBI agent with a high-stakes career, the park was one of the few places he could unwind. Across the park, Officer Daniel Harper strolled with a hardened demeanor. Years on the force had instilled in him a sense of authority, but also an unspoken prejudice he refused to acknowledge. When his eyes landed on Aaron, a lone black man sitting quietly, Daniel felt an inexplicable unease. He stopped in his tracks. "He's too calm," Daniel muttered under his breath, suspicion taking root. From his bench, Aaron noticed the officer's lingering gaze. He sighed inwardly, already sensing where this was heading. It wasn't the first time he'd been judged by the color of his skin rather than his actions. Daniel tightened his grip on his baton and approached. "Afternoon," he said curtly. Aaron looked up from his book, his expression neutral. "Afternoon, officer." "What brings you out here today?" Aaron gestured to his book. "Just enjoying a good read. It's a nice day." Daniel frowned. "You from around here?" Aaron met his gaze steadily. "I've been around." The non-answer annoyed Daniel. His instinct screamed, suspicious, though there was nothing to back it up. "Let me see some ID," Daniel demanded, his tone hardening. Aaron's grip on the book tightened. He knew his rights, but he also knew the risks of defiance. "Am I under arrest?" he asked calmly. Daniel's jaw tightened. "You will be if you don't cooperate." Aaron slowly reached into his pocket, pulling out his ID. Daniel snatched it, barely glancing at the name before barking, "Stand up! Turn around!" Aaron complied without resistance, though his frustration simmered beneath the surface. The cuffs clicked around his wrists, cold and biting. Parkgoers paused, watching the scene with a mix of confusion and unease. As Daniel led Aaron to his patrol car, the tension was palpable. Nearby, a mother ushered her child away from the scene, her expression tight with discomfort. Aaron, now seated in the back of the car, stared out the window, his mind racing. Despite his calm exterior, a deep weariness settled over him. After years of service, years of proving himself, he was still reduced to this, a suspect without cause. Daniel, seated in the driver's seat, felt a swell of pride. "Another one off the streets," he muttered to himself, oblivious to the reality of his actions. The Southridge Police Precinct bustled with its usual rhythm, phones ringing, officers exchanging reports. Daniel marched Aaron through the main hall, ignoring the curious glances and hushed whispers. Behind the booking desk, Officer Matt Johnson looked up and froze. His eyes flicked to the ID in Daniel's hand and then to Aaron. Recognition flashed across his face, but he quickly masked it. "Take him to Captain Walker," Matt said, his voice strained. Daniel frowned but complied, guiding Aaron toward the captain's office. Aaron, still calm, noted the nervous energy in Matt's voice. Someone here knew who he was. Captain Emma Walker, known for her sharp instincts and no-nonsense demeanor, looked up as Daniel entered with Aaron. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes lingered on Aaron a moment longer than necessary. "Officer Harper, what's going on here?" Daniel launched into his explanation, painting Aaron as suspicious and uncooperative. Captain Walker's sharp gaze shifted between the two men before landing on Aaron. "Mr. Carter, do you have anything to add?" Aaron, his tone measured, replied, "Nothing, Captain." "I was sitting in the park, reading a book." Walker's lips pressed into a thin line. "Officer Harper, step outside." Daniel hesitated but obeyed, leaving the two alone. As soon as the door closed, Captain Walker's demeanor shifted. "Agent Carter," she said quietly, "I apologize for this. I had no idea." Aaron nodded. "I appreciate that, Captain. But this isn't about me. It's about what this represents." When Daniel re-entered the office, he immediately sensed the shift. Captain Walker's voice was cold. "Do you know who you've just arrested, Officer Harper?" Daniel blinked, confused. "No, Captain." "Aaron Carter is a senior FBI agent," she said, her words cutting. Daniel's face paled. "I didn't know. And that's the problem, Walker snapped. It shouldn't matter who he is. Your actions were based on assumptions, not evidence, Daniel stammered, but there was no defense strong enough to undo what had been done. As Aaron walked out of the Southridge police precinct that day, his calm demeanor belied the storm brewing outside. By the time he reached his car, videos of his arrest had already begun to circulate on social media. Taken by park-goers who had witnessed the incident, the clips painted a stark picture: a black man sitting peacefully, being handcuffed without cause by an officer whose bias was on full display. Within hours, the story exploded. News headlines screamed, "Racial profiling by local officer leads to arrest of FBI agent." Community leaders and activists quickly rallied, demanding answers. Outside the precinct, a crowd gathered, holding signs that read, "Justice for Aaron," and "End racial profiling now." Local news vans lined the streets, reporters delivering live updates as chants filled the air. "This isn't just about Aaron Carter," one activist shouted through a megaphone. "This is about every black man and woman who's been judged, harassed, and humiliated simply for existing." Inside the precinct, the atmosphere was tense. Officers whispered to one another, their expressions ranging from concern to defensiveness. Daniel, now confined to his desk pending an investigation, watched the protests unfold on a small TV in the corner. He felt a knot in his stomach tighten with each chant. For the first time, he realized this wasn't just about him. It was about something much larger. Aaron, meanwhile, received a flood of messages from friends, colleagues, and strangers alike. Some praised his composure, while others shared their own stories of racial bias. The weight of it all settled heavily on his shoulders. He appreciated the support, but he also knew the fight was far from over. That evening, Aaron sat in his apartment, scrolling through the comments under one of the viral videos. Some were supportive, but others were venomous, defending Daniel's actions and attacking Aaron's character. It was a stark reminder of the divide that still existed. But Aaron was no stranger to adversity. If anything, the backlash only strengthened his resolve. The internal review began the following week, bringing the precinct under intense scrutiny. A panel of senior officers, community representatives, and legal experts convened to investigate the incident and determine accountability. Aaron arrived at the hearing in a sharp suit, his presence commanding respect. As he took his seat, he glanced around the room. On one side, Daniel sat stiffly, flanked by his lawyer. On the other, Captain Walker looked resolute, her leadership now under the microscope as well. The hearing opened with a playback of Daniel's body cam footage. The room fell silent as the video showed Daniel approaching Aaron in the park, his tone hostile from the start. The panel members exchanged uneasy glances as the footage continued, revealing Daniel's refusal to listen to Aaron's explanations and his hasty decision to arrest him. When the footage ended, Aaron was invited to speak. He stood, his voice calm but firm. "This incident is not an isolated event," he began. "It's a symptom of a larger problem, a culture within law enforcement that too often allows bias to dictate actions. As someone who has dedicated his life to justice, I find this unacceptable." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "I'm not here to destroy careers or seek revenge. I'm here to ensure that what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else. This is an opportunity to reflect, to learn, and to change." The panel members nodded thoughtfully, clearly moved by Aaron's testimony. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, he faltered, his voice shaky. I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he said. "I was just trying to do my job." "Your job," one panel member interjected, "is to protect and serve, not to judge and profile. Do you understand the gravity of your actions, Officer Harper?" Daniel looked down, his hands clasped tightly. "I do," he muttered, though the weight of his words felt hollow. The hearing continued for hours, delving into witness statements, department policies, and systemic issues. By the end, it was clear that changes were inevitable, but for Aaron, the true test would be whether those changes would last. In the weeks following the hearing, Captain Walker made good on her promise to enact meaningful reform. She spearheaded a comprehensive overhaul of the precinct's training programs, focusing on racial bias, de-escalation techniques, and community engagement. The changes weren't just on paper. Officers were required to attend workshops led by diversity and inclusion experts, where they engaged in uncomfortable but necessary conversations about privilege, bias, and accountability. Some embraced the training, eager to improve. Others resisted, grumbling about political correctness and overreach. Aaron played an active role in the reforms, collaborating with Walker to design and implement the programs. He attended training sessions, sharing his story and encouraging officers to see beyond stereotypes. "We all have biases," he told them. "The question is whether we're willing to confront them and grow." Meanwhile, the community began to notice the changes. Officers started attending local events, engaging with residents in ways that felt genuine rather than performative. Relationships that had been strained for years slowly began to mend. But the path wasn't without challenges. A group of officers filed a complaint against the new policies, claiming they were unfairly targeted. The media seized on the controversy, framing it as a battle between progress and tradition. Aaron remained steadfast. "Change is never easy," he told a reporter, "but it's always necessary. This isn't about punishment. It's about building a better future." For Daniel, the aftermath of the incident was a period of painful introspection. Now on indefinite leave, he spent his days at home, far from the precinct that had once defined his identity. At first, he was defensive, blaming the media, the protesters, and even Aaron for what he saw as an overreaction. But as the days turned into weeks and the silence of his empty apartment became deafening, Daniel began to confront the truth. He revisited the body cam footage, forcing himself to watch it with fresh eyes. For the first time, he saw the hostility in his voice, the assumptions in his words, the fear in Aaron's calm defiance. Daniel reached out to a therapist, something he never thought he'd do. In their sessions, he unpacked years of ingrained biases, tracing them back to his upbringing, his training, and the culture of the force. It was a humbling process, one that left him raw, but also hopeful. One afternoon, Daniel sat down and wrote a letter to Aaron. It was short and simple, but heartfelt. "I owe you an apology," it began. "Not just for what I did, but for what it represents. I'm committed to doing better." Whether Aaron would ever read it didn't matter. For Daniel, the act of writing it was a step toward redemption, a small but significant step in a long journey of self-awareness and growth. Months after the incident, the Brookfield precinct had undergone a transformation. The precinct's new policies and training programs were slowly making an impact. Officers who had once resisted the changes began to approach their work with a renewed perspective, and the community started to heal from the rift caused by the controversy. For Aaron Carter, the incident was a turning point, not just for himself, but for the city he served. His story had sparked difficult but necessary conversations about accountability and fairness in law enforcement. As he walked through Lakeshore Park one sunny afternoon, the same park where it all began, he felt a quiet hope. The laughter of children, the hum of conversations, and the sight of families enjoying the day reminded him why this work mattered. Nearby, a young black man sat on a bench with a book in hand, seemingly at ease. Aaron couldn't help but smile at the sight. It was a simple moment, but it symbolized the progress he hoped to see more of. A world where no one had to live in fear of being judged for how they looked. Back at the precinct, Captain Laura Walker worked tirelessly to ensure the changes were more than cosmetic. She held regular meetings with community leaders and residents, listening to their concerns and addressing issues head-on. Her determination inspired many within the department to follow her lead. Officers began participating in community events, patrolling neighborhoods with an emphasis on building relationships rather than just enforcing the law. Even Daniel Harper, now back at the precinct after extensive counseling and training, had shown signs of growth. While he still struggled to fully reconcile with his past actions, he had taken steps toward becoming a better officer. He no longer rushed to judgment and had started working closely with younger recruits, sharing his experience as a cautionary tale. Though trust with the community would take time to rebuild, Daniel was committed to doing the work. One day, Aaron received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a handwritten letter from Daniel, the same letter he had written weeks ago but hadn't yet sent. Aaron read the words carefully, noting the genuine remorse and resolve to change that filled the page. For a moment, he considered reaching out to Daniel, but he decided against it. For now, change didn't come from words alone, but from actions, and Aaron would let time tell the rest of the story. As the months passed, the community continued to evolve. The conversation sparked by Aaron's arrest had not faded, but instead grew into a larger movement for justice and equality. Local schools began incorporating discussions about systemic bias into their curriculums, and the city council passed new measures to enhance police oversight and accountability. For Aaron, the work was far from over, but the progress gave him hope. As he left the park that day, he stopped to greet the young man on the bench, exchanging a friendly nod before continuing his walk. The moment was brief but meaningful, a quiet reminder that change was possible, one step at a time. This was a new beginning, not just for Aaron or the precinct, but for the city itself. And while the journey ahead was long, it was one that Aaron was ready to walk, determined to make sure that what happened to him would lead to a better future for everyone.